labor demand still exceeds the supply of available workers. FOMC participants expect the rebalancing in the labor market to continue, easing upward pressures on inflation. The median unemployment rate projection in the SEP rises from 3.8% at the end of this year to 4.1% over the next 2 years. Inflation remains well above our longer run goal of 2%, 4% over the 12 months ending in August, and that excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 3.9%. Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year, and longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. Nevertheless, the process of getting inflation sustainably down to 2% has a long way to go. The median projection in the SEP for total PCE inflation is 3.3% this year, falls to 2.5% next year, and reaches 2% in 2026. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are highly attentive to the risks that high inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. As I noted earlier, since early last year, we have raised our policy rate by 5.25 percentage points. We see the current stance of monetary policy as restrictive, putting downward pressure on economic activity, hiring, and inflation. In addition,
dude, what kind of bootleg internet does the Fed have?
The economy is facing headwinds from tighter credit conditions for households and businesses. It range for the federal funds rate at 5.25 to 5.5%, and to continue the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings. We are committed to achieving and sustaining a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to our 2% goal over time. In our SEP, FOMC participants wrote down their individual assessments of an appropriate path for the federal funds rate based on what each participant judges to be the most likely scenario going forward.
So this is basically their projections of where they think the Fed funds rate is going to be at the end of the year, and they're all disagreeing.
Funds rate will be 5.6% at the end of this year, 5.1% at the end of 2024.
5.6% at the end of this year means that we have one more rate hike before the year ends.
Compared with our June summary of economic projections, the median projection is unrevised for the end of this year, but has moved up by 0.5 percentage point at the end of the next 2 years.
That's not good. That is not good.
Of course,
at least for stocks.
Decision or plan. If the economy does not evolve as projected, the path of policy will adjust as appropriate percentage point at the end of the next 2 years. These projections, of course, are not a committee's decision or plan. If the economy does not evolve as projected, the path of policy will adjust as appropriate to foster our maximum employment and price stability goals.
Again, data dependent. Well, we will if it gets bad enough, but we won't if it doesn't.
Totality of the incoming data and their implications for the outlook for economic activity and inflation, as well as the balance of risks. Given how far we have come, we are in a position to proceed carefully as we assess the incoming data and the evolving outlook and risks. Real interest rates now are well above mainstream estimates of the neutral policy rate, but we are mindful of the inherent uncertainties in precisely gauging the stance of policy. We're prepared to raise rates further if appropriate, and we intend to hold policy at a restrictive level until we're confident that inflation is moving down sustainably toward our objective. In determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time, the committee will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy, the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation, and economic and financial developments. We remain committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. It's essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals.
By making all of you lose your jobs. We're going to save the employment. We're maximizing employment by making sure that you lose your job. Beautiful, Powell. I'm glad I got you in my corner.